I've always been a great fan of Ruthin Open Doors, and I love being able to go into all the different places and actually peel back the history and the stories of what actually used to happen in this area. I've started off by looking at Ruthin right from the top of the Clwydian Range, where you can see the trails of the old drovers that used to bring their sheep into market. There are several Iron Age hill forts on the top of the Clwydian Range too, so you can actually just try and imagine the Iron Age folk walking down the hills into the Vale. I want to start this trip by looking at a village called Llanbedr, which is just on the outside of Ruthin, because I think it's got some really interesting stories. And I have to say that I am not a historian. Some of my dates may actually not make sense, but what I do love is I do love the stories, and I hope that I will keep you interested in some of the stories that come from the area. As you take the road to Llanbedr from the north, you'll see there are some pretty spectacular bends in the road. I wanted to take you this way so that you'd see the church on your right hand side, but then see that there's a toll house on the left, followed by a 16th century pub called the Griffin. The Griffin is about to enter exciting times because, having been closed for 2 years, a young local lady has taken the pub on and has been revamping it. Luckily, we had a matriarch of the village that used to actually collect all sorts of information about the history of the place. It actually does show that people who used to go to church in the morning often used to spend an afternoon of revelry in the pub afterwards. The church that you can actually see from the main road isn't our only church. In fact, although that's been standing for well over 100 years, we've got another church just on the hillside if you take the road up towards Gethlifo. You can actually walk up to the old church, and behind it there's a really significant building in Llanbedr, and that's Llanbedr Hall. Once a manor house, it was converted to a hospital for people with TB. There are many examples of lovely postcards that have been sent by the patients to their families, and they make the place look absolutely beautiful. Going back to the pub, it's had many celebrated visitors in the past years, one being General Charles de Gaulle, who was recognised as head of the freedom fighters in France during World War II. De Gaulle spent much of World War II in this country and brought over his family, particularly his beloved Anne, who had Down syndrome. She was placed in Llanbedr Hall Hospital to protect her from the Nazis, and often he came to see her and stop in the Griffin pub. One of the owners of the pub was the celebrated Joan Carlyle. She was an opera singer who performed all over the world. There are still people in the village who remember her being the owner. Her mum was the owner before her. And what she used to do is bring many celebrated people from the opera world and the celebrity world to the pub. One of her friends was Sterling Moss, and there are people around today who remember him driving up and down the road to Gethlifo at speed. For those of you too young to know, Sterling Moss was actually a champion racing car driver back in the day. There was one story that actually hit national press headlines while Joan was in charge of the pub, and when I came across it in the archives, it did make me giggle. I hope that you find it funny too.
Hang glider pilot helps hunt raiders. A hang glider pilot was called in by police yesterday to help comb the slopes of the Clwydian Range after raiders stole £500 from international opera star Joan Carlyle. As the search began for the youths involved in the robbery, hang glider pilot Ken Pryddich from near Wrexham, who had been flying from the slopes known as the Shelf, offered his help. Equipped with a police radio, Ken soared over the hillside, reporting his sightings to officers with tracker dogs below. The drama began at lunchtime while Miss Carlyle was prepping snacks in the Griffin. Her husband, Robert Ayres, saw the youth in the hotel's private quarters and went with him to the car park. When he returned, he discovered another youth coming down the stairs. As the two made off towards a yellow Datsun, Mr. Ayres remembered he had left £500 in their lounge. He rushed upstairs and found it had been stolen. He asked a friend, Mr. Philip Johnson, who was pulling into the car park, to follow the car towards Ruthin. The police was called and Joan drove along the country lane towards Griffin to warn Mr. Richard Halsall from the Three Pigeons Inn that he could be the next on the raiders' list. Roadblocks were set up and the Datsun was stopped on the Ruthin to Wrexham road near Clwydian College. A youth and a teenage girl were arrested at the scene and 3 others ran off across the field. A local farmer reported seeing the youth hiding in a haystack. 2 of them were arrested and a 3rd was still missing that night.
It was reported in the Sunday Express of 1980 that 4 individuals were actually charged but given a suspended sentence. I just love that story. A time when you could run out of a pub into a car park and say, "Stop that car," and where you could find criminals in a haystack. The newly refurbed Griffin pub will be open anytime soon, so please come and stop by, have a drink, and maybe wander around the village and think about some of the stories I've shared today. Thanks for listening. Bye.